Alright, Evie and I are back, getting out of the way so you can at least get a cameo before I hide her. Shoot. Sorry, Evie, you gotta move. We are back with another Destiny video. After a very, very large TWAB yesterday, I spent my entire article this morning kind of dissecting the clue in the only image they released, which is that I think next season is going to see the return of Leviathan and the arrival of Keitel? I don't know how to pronounce that. Whoever Callus's daughter is, that has been teased a couple different ways so far, but all of the symbols are kind of aligning to indicate that the Leviathan, or something like the Leviathan, with those kind of vibes, are going to be back next season. You can go read that article if you want, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today, because this is not really the main focus of the TWAB, which was about seasonal challenges and also a bunch of sandbox changes. Evie is not interested in these sandbox changes, apparently. This created kind of a usual firestorm in the community where no one really seemed all that satisfied with the end result, and that's for kind of a number of different reasons. But the main takeaway is kind of what I put in my thumbnail here in my title, is that this is one of those instances where Bungie announces changes and then it just doesn't really seem like they have taken community feedback, or they haven't taken it in the right way. There's a lot of kind of different angles to touch on here, but I'll start with one of the most sort of comical ones, where part of this is like about timing and perception. So everyone knows that like Destiny 2 PvP players are kind of in a rough spot. A lot of the PvP players on PC especially, they've had to deal with cheating in trials and all this stuff, and they are really not satisfied with the state of the game. They haven't been for a while. Bungie in general has not really spoken about PvP at all. So I don't think too many people were amused to see that when they were starting to talk about PvP, it's about the coming arrival of crossplay, which will integrate both console and PC play. We don't know exactly how that's going to work yet, but Bungie is making changes to make it a little more balanced when these players have to play together. So they are PC as native kind of recoil reduction because of using a mouse, whereas console has controller and that has aim assist, which PC doesn't have. So it's been sort of a balance. But Bungie is essentially increasing recoil for a whole bunch of weapon types by I think about 20%, and then like rebuffing recoil a little bit on a couple more gun types. It's a little confusing, like reducing camera shake. But the point is like it really comes off like, after all this time not talking about PvP and like these PC players getting really frustrated with the state of things, that they show up and the first big thing they're doing is like increasing recoil on PC, which I think you can debate the merits of that. I've heard some people saying like maybe you should just reduce recoil on console a bit. Like health reasons, I understand why they might want to do this, because it means you can now kind of farm for roles that are more than just mostly range. That's like what everyone on PC is just going for, because recoil is not really a factor at all and has never been a thing. And I know everyone doesn't play on both like console and PC, but I do a lot. And the game is just way easier on PC, in part because of lack of recoil. I mean, mouse and keyboard aiming is always kind of easier in general, but like the submachine gun class especially, which they even addressed in this TWAB, is like a totally different gun because it's barely usable on console, but on PC, you can make it kind of a laser. So while I kind of maybe understand where they're coming from, the timing of this, before they've talked about, anti-cheat and all these other, PvP problems and PvP not being touched on, for so long, I understand how that has rubbed people the wrong way. Then we can get into the actual kind of nerfs and buffs of things, and it's mostly kind of about a lack of what we're seeing. The biggest buff is this buff to rocket launchers, which are getting a 30% damage buff. This is good, and yet this has also been like years coming, like pretty much since D2 vanilla. Like rocket launchers have never been in a good spot, so it's good that it's here. It has just taken a absurdly long time to get here. And then the other thing that happened is the biggest active nerf is to swords, which they've already been nerfed, but they're getting another 15% damage reduction because they're just too, according to Bungie, they're too widely used. And this has become kind of another point of contention where Bungie doesn't, the perception is that Bungie is not really considering like manual player feedback, like, you know, me making a video or writing an article or people tweeting their thoughts at them or streamers talking about things on stream or, you know, all these different ways that people just kind of like give feedback about what they want to see, and that they're too concentrated on the player numbers, which, or on like the data from players, which don't tell the whole story. So in this case, the idea is that 65%, I think it's like in all game activities, like 65% of heavy weapons used are swords. And I think you have to break that down a little bit because obviously, you know, we're talking about DSC with Atrax, which it's an enemy you can get up close to. So of course you're going to use swords. We have Lament, which is the best exotic of the season, which is a sword. And then the other 35%, it's not like that's even evenly split among grenade launchers, rocket launchers, linear fusions and stuff, and machine guns. It's most of that 35% is probably like Anarchy, Xenophage, and like a very select, you know, few other options, because it includes exotics. So people are not super pleased that swords are getting another nerf because it doesn't seem like it's being done for the right reasons. I'm of the opinion that I don't think a 15% nerf will like kill swords. Like I think Lament is so strong that it's still going to be strong no matter what. Even that 15% nerf will still, I mean, you're not going to not be using Lament for Atrax, for instance. Like that's still going to be the best way. But the problem is like they did buff rocket launchers, and yet, you know, there's all these different things that just seem that players have been giving feedback for so long and then nothing happens. Like it doesn't feel like Bungie kind of remembers that linear fusions are even in the game. Those have not been like remotely adjusted for eons, for PvE especially. They even have a new linear fusion this season, but it's, you know, that weapon class seems very out of step with everything else, and why you would ever use a linear fusion in that slot is kind of, you know, no one has a good answer for that. There's no reason to. The same thing, at least in most instances, machine guns never got their nerf to boss damage reverted, which was only put in place in the first place because we used to have access to wells and barricades that would give you unlimited refilling ammo. And now the only time you can do that is with Titans with, what is the name of the exotic that I use every day? Actium War Ray, that's what it is. I literally have been running that for 2 straight seasons, and I can't remember the name of it. That's the only thing that can do that now, as opposed to anyone with a machine gun being able to do that. But the boss damage has not been reverted ever, so that's, unless you're in like a very specific kind of mob clearing area, that's not really something you're going to be using for the most part. So that's just the heavy slot. I mean, they went and nerfed snipers again. They buffed fusions a little bit, even though it certainly seems like shotguns are the most kind of pressing thing going on in the Crucible right now. People have been wanting a scout rifle buff for a very long time now, which they did something with aim assist on it, but I don't think that has really done anything. And I think there's still issues with people wanting, hand cannons and bows to clear mobs better. People want the PvE nerf to sniper rifle damage reverted because no one thinks that was justified. There are old nerfs like box breathing and trench barrel that were nerfed for, reasons that may have made sense at the time, but don't really make any sense now, but they remain nerfed. And then there's kind of more general issues like, I saw the PvP, the PvP crowd's like, okay, you're going to increase recoil on PC, and like we have been complaining about 3-peaking for years at this point, and that is still never brought up, never addressed, anything like that. So all of this just kind of becomes this huge amalgam of, for every 1 or 2 things Bungie kind of slowly trickles out and answers fan feedback about, especially in regards to the Sandbox, this keeps happening. There's another, 50 things that they're still not addressing, even though some of these things have been consistent, feedback points for forever. And I'm seeing a lot of, streamers and YouTubers and stuff like they were, Bungie has asked for, what's your feedback on the current, how's the game feel? And they posted lists of things, and now they're just retweeting those lists because nothing on the list actually has been changed after all this time. Granted, I guess we can't really know how everything is going to feel and play until we actually get there. And yet, I understand the frustration and why it feels like we're kind of in another, we're listening meme moment, because there's just so many things that are continue to be not addressed. And I think at a certain point, you have to address why you're not addressing them. Like, if you're not going to fix tree peaking, like, explain like what the challenges are and why it is taking so long to address tree peaking. Or if you don't think that, if you think that the sniper rifle damage nerf was justified, or if you think machine guns still need to have way less boss damage than they used to, like, why? I think you kind of have to go a little bit more in depth as to why that is, and not just kind of announce things here and there and not really explain them. I maintain that Bungie in general is much better at communication than a vast, variety of other series, but in instances like we got with this week's TWAB, it just can be a little frustrating when you see like some weirdly specific things addressed, but there's all these outstanding issues that, have remained a problem for season after season after season, year, like in some cases year after year, and they never get fixed. And this can expand outward into the rest of the game. I just wrote a thing, this past week about why do we still not have true strike specific loot? Like, that has been the number one, I think, point of feedback about Destiny 2 kind of reward farming since day one. And we've had like a bunch of different versions that are like almost strike specific loot, and yet they've still never just gone back to the old system that everyone had no problem with from the Rise of Iron Skeleton Key era. And I do think that they will often address things in time. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes a couple seasons, sometimes it's pretty quick. Like, we said we liked umbral engrams, a season later we're getting permanent umbral engrams. That seems like it's going to be good. But there are other instances where the same issues just keep coming up time and time again, and they're never addressed. And this time around, I think some of this is at least a lot, being driven by the PvP community, who is already frustrated with the lack of communication about PvP, and then they get all these kind of weird, nerfs, and then more recoil on PC, and there's still nothing being addressed about PvP substantively. And everyone is now, it's not going to be next week either. We heard there's going to be some sort of like patch preview, but the actual addressing of that is probably not going to be till the state of the game that Joe Blackburn promised, which is not going to be until sometime next season. I would say at least a month away. And from everything we know about the current state of things, nothing is really changing about PvP next season. We're getting new strikes, no indication we're getting new Crucible maps. Trials had some, Trials got its adept that season. We are getting Trials armor. I think that's the new thing. And then Crucible is getting like 2 new playlist weapons, just like all the other playlists, but that's it. And, we've had pretty much a month of complaining about very, very vocal, like more vocal than I've heard in a very long time, complaining about kind of the state of PvP and Bungie ignoring it. And then the first real thing we hear is that they're increasing recoil, so PC and console players are on a more even playing field when crossplay gets here. And that is a whole other thing that I cannot go into now, but I am a little concerned that they're just kind of throw everyone in the same pool and not have it be like an opt-in system or grouping by input method, because I still think that PC players are going to mostly shred console players if it's just one giant pool. So I'm a little concerned about that. But we don't have all the details on that yet, nor do we know when crossplay is actually coming, but it's not going to be, at least not the beginning of the season. So I guess I'll save that for another day. But this is kind of why everyone's upset right now. I think the actual implementation of the nerfs and buffs mentioned may not be as extreme as people think. I'm most curious about a 30% increase to rockets. Fundamentally, the problem with rockets is that all of them except Truth have just one in the chamber, except if you get like Ambitious Assassin. So I'm wondering if the 30% damage increase will be enough to even make them viable. I don't think the sword nerf is a huge deal. I don't know if the recoil thing will actually be that big of a deal or not, but I guess we'll see. And then the other stuff is pretty minor, so, but it's mostly about what isn't being touched and what is not being addressed at all, when there's all these kind of things that should be buffed or rebuffed or reverted, or, you know, and stuff that is just kind of ignored and not brought up at all. We'll see what the next week holds. It is 13 minutes past reset. I didn't expect anything to happen today at reset, even though it's like the weekend reset. But next week, Tuesday, we're getting the trailer and maybe some in-game things about next season. We'll see if all my Leviathan theories are right. And then another TWAB, and then the seasonal launch. And we'll see how things go. But I don't know. All we can do is either quit the game if we're just too frustrated with the way things are going. And you know me, I'm never probably ever going to get to that point. That's me, but I don't blame people for getting there. Or we just keep getting feedback kind of endlessly, and maybe some will be implemented in a month or a season or a year or 4 years. I've been asking for transmog for 7 years, and we're finally getting it a season after this one. So anything's possible if you have the patience of a monk. So we'll see. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any thoughts of your own, you can feel free to chime in. Give you one last hello for Evie. Thanks to everyone who's been asking about Evie. Despite her clear lack of energy right now, her paw is starting to get better, and I'm hoping that she's going to make a full recovery pretty soon. But what do you say, Evie? Want to say goodbye? Too tired? Okay, well, there we go. All right, I will see you guys later, and thanks for watching.